We now turn to Mr. Nimocks. Mr. Austin Nimocks is Senior Legal Counsel for the Alliance Defense Fund. Mr. Nimocks' practice focuses on the definition of marriage, parental rights, voters' rights, and religious liberty. ADF is closely involved in defending DOMA against legal challenges. Mr. Nimocks earned both his bachelor's and JD from Baylor University in Waco, Texas. Mr. Nimocks, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Grassley, members of the committee, for the privilege and invitation of testifying here today. Mr. Chairman, as debates rage these days regarding budget deficits, debt ceilings, and jobs, I am pleased that this body is taking some time to discuss mothers and fathers, arguably the two most important jobs in our society. This legislation also gives us the opportunity to look at an important query that is oftentimes overlooked. Why is government in the marriage business? Mr. Chairman, as you're aware, Congress enacted federal DOMA in 1996 by an 84% margin. Enacting it, it stated as follows, quote, "At bottom, civil society has an interest in maintaining and protecting the institution of heterosexual marriage because it has a deep and abiding interest in encouraging responsible procreation and child-rearing. Simply put, government has an interest in marriage because it has an interest in children," unquote. This truth remains today, and Americans agree. As evidenced by likely the most extensive national research survey ever conducted on Americans' attitudes about marriage, completed in May of this year, we know that 62% of Americans agree that marriage should be defined as only a union between one man and one woman. Mr. Chairman, marriage is not just a mere law or creature of statute, but a social institution that has universally crossed all political, religious, sociological, geographical, and historical lines. As put by the famous philosopher Bertrand Russell, a self-described atheist, quote, "But for children, there would be no need of any institution concerned with sex. It is through children alone that sexual relations become of importance to society and worthy to be taken cognizance of by a legal institution," unquote. Accordingly, marriage between one man and one woman is a long-standing worldwide idea that is a building block of society. Marriage doesn't prescribe conduct or prevent individuals from living how they want to live. And individuals marry, Mr. Chairman, as they always have, for a wide variety of personal reasons. But today's discussion should not be about the private reasons why individuals marry, but about the policy of our country as a whole and the government's unique interest in this public institution. Because the government's interest in marriage is different from the reasons why individuals choose to marry, entrance to marriage has never been conditioned upon a couple's actual ability and desire to find happiness together, their level of financial entanglement, or their actual personal dedication to each other. Rather, marriage laws stem from the fact that children are the product of the sexual relationships between men and women, and that both fathers and mothers are viewed to be necessary for children. Thus, throughout history, diverse cultures and faiths have recognized marriage between one man and one woman as the best way to promote healthy families and societies. The studies and science you've heard about over a long period of time demonstrate that the ideal family structure for a child is a family headed by an opposite-sex biological parents in a low-conflict marriage. But some, Mr. Chairman, are asking you to ignore the unique and demonstrable differences between men and women in parenthood. No mothers, no fathers, just generic parents. But, Mr. Chairman, there are no generic people. We are composed of two complementary but different halves of humanity. As our Supreme Court has stated, quote, "The truth is that the two sexes are not fungible. Inherent differences between men and women we have come to appreciate remain cause for celebration," unquote. This body should also disavow any notion that repealing federal DOMA is a constitutional mandate. Mr. Chairman, in 1967, the Supreme Court decided the case of Loving against Virginia. In that case, the Supreme Court struck down a race-based marriage law that prohibited whites from marrying anyone of color. In so ruling, the Supreme Court talked about marriage as, quote, "fundamental to our very existence and survival," unquote, discussing the timeless and procreative aspects of marriage. Just 5 years later, the Supreme Court in 1972 substantively upheld a decision by the Minnesota Supreme Court that marriage laws like federal DOMA are not unconstitutional and rejected a claim for same-sex marriage. Mr. Chairman, not one single justice of the United States Supreme Court found the constitutional claims against marriage worthy of a court's review. Marriage between a man and a woman naturally builds families and gives hope that the next generations will carry that family into the future. And while some may argue, Mr. Chairman, that times have changed, they cannot credibly argue that humanity as a gendered species has changed. Men and women still compose the two great halves of humanity. Men and women are still wonderfully and uniquely different, and men and women still play important and necessary roles in the family. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, because of the fundamental truth that children are the product of sexual relationships between men and women, and that men and women each bring something important to the table of parenting, this government maintains a compelling interest in protecting and preserving the institution of marriage as the union of one man and one woman. Thank you for the time and privilege, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Coons. I was over at a transportation hearing, so I want to thank all of you for being here. And I was really struck after hearing the first panel by just the legal entanglements, all of the issues that have arisen in the last few years, whether it's someone trying to be at a partner's bedside when they're dying, or whether it's some of the other issues that the witnesses raised and stories that they told. And it made me think about what you were just speaking about, Mr. Wolfson, that it's been 15 years since DOMA was enacted. The legal and social landscape has changed since then. And I guess I'd ask everyone, in your opinion, how has the issue of same-sex marriage transformed over the years? What effect has the passage of time had on the debate? If you could just answer briefly, Mr. Solomon.
Thank you, Senator. I think first and foremost, perhaps the most powerful contributor to changing American public opinions on the question of same-sex marriage or the circumstances of our relationships generally were perhaps best displayed in the previous panel. Hardworking, committed, loving Americans having the opportunity to tell the stories of their lives, and more to the point, to really talk about the inequities and the injustice that we face in the absence of marriage equality. And I think that all across this country, the more opportunities that we have had to tell those stories, to help people understand the circumstances of our lives, and in particular, when I reflect on Ron's story in the previous panel, the genuine inequity and despair that we face in the absence of marriage equality, I think that most Americans, and most Americans to my way of thinking, are fair-minded and optimistic, can't help but be moved by these stories, and can't help but be moved in the direction of understanding the need for full marriage equality. Or in the case of the debate today, and we should not lose sight of what this conversation is about today, the real need to ensure that in those states where same-sex couples enjoy the right to marriage equality, that they be afforded those federal benefits, particularly things like Social Security survivor benefits.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Solomon. Just quickly, Mr. Nimocks, any response on the question about the changes over the last 15 years?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Senator Klobuchar. I don't believe that there have been substantial changes in the opinions of Americans across this country about marriage as time has passed. We know that the first vote in this country occurred in Hawaii in 1998, the last one in Iowa in 2010. And what is clear in all those votes in all the 32 jurisdictions where Americans have voted upon the question of marriage is they have been unanimous that marriage should be the union of one man and one woman. And as I alluded to in the poll, where 62% of Americans agree that marriage should be defined as the union of one man and one woman, that's the exact language that's going to be on the ballot in 2012 in your home state of Minnesota. And Minnesotans are going to vote on that. And I believe Minnesotans will become the 33rd jurisdiction to affirm that. The question before the committee with respect is the question of marriage, whether it should be the union of one man and one woman, whether mothers and fathers are necessary. And I think Americans over a large period of time have been very consistent on that. Thank you.